"Move the old man, he's spoiling my shot." That was the first thing she said to me, not a greeting, not a question, an order flung across the forecourt as if I were a piece of furniture she'd found in the wrong room. I did not answer. I was on the King's Hour at the south arch of Wexbury House, and a guard on the King's Hour does not answer. But behind my still face, the part of me that had spent 11 years learning when a wrong thing is being said heard it land, and did not like the sound. She was a tall woman in a coat the color of new money, flanked by 3 people whose whole job, plainly, was to agree with her. One held a tablet, one held a reflector board. One held nothing at all, which in my experience is always the most dangerous kind of assistant, the one whose only task is to make problems disappear. A small crew of camera people had set up across the cobbles, lenses on tripods, a boom held high, and a man crouched at a monitor with his hand cupped over the screen against the glare. They had a permit. I'd watched the forecourt office wave them through at 9. A permit to film the gate and the changing of the section. A permit, I would learn, that she believed covered a great deal more than gates. And the old man she wanted moved was sitting exactly where he had sat every morning of the 4 years I'd stood that arch. His name, though I did not know it that morning, was Mr. Alden. He sat on the 3rd bench from the west wall, the one nearest the lamp, with a paper bag of bread crusts on his knee and a cane hooked over the armrest. His coat was old. That is the kindest and the truest word for it, old, mended at one elbow with thread that didn't quite match, the cuffs gone soft, a button replaced with one a shade too dark. He fed the pigeons the way a man feeds them when he has fed them for years, not flinging the bread, but laying it down in a slow arc near his shoes, so the boldest came to his feet and the timid ones could eat at the edges. He had a face like a folded letter. He was no trouble to anyone, and he had never once in 4 years been any trouble to me. "Did you hear me?" the woman said, closer now. "The man on the bench, he's in the frame. I need the frame clean." I heard her. I held the arch. The assistant with the tablet leaned to her ear. "The forecourt's a public space, Mara. He's allowed to." "I don't care what he's allowed," she said, not lowering her voice at all. "I care what it looks like. This is going out to 9 million people. I'm not putting a tramp on a bench behind me." She turned back to me, and now she smiled the way people smile when they've decided to be reasonable with someone they consider slow. "You, soldier, you move people, don't you? That's the job, so move him, politely. I don't want a scene." There it was, the whole of it in 4 sentences. Move him. That's the job. I don't want a scene. She had looked at the bench and seen a stain. She had looked at me and seen a tool for removing stains. And she had decided, with the easy certainty of someone used to rooms rearranging themselves around her, that both of us would do as we were told because she was paying for the morning, and the morning therefore belonged to her. I have stood that arch through a great many things. I have stood it while a man shouted in my face for a full minute to win a bet with his friends. I have stood it through rain that ran off the bearskin and down my collar in a thin, cold line. I have stood it on the morning we buried a king of the house, when the whole city went so quiet you could hear the flags. The arch teaches you that your stillness is not nothing. Your stillness is a wall, and a wall does not have to be loud to be a wall. But a wall is not the same as a closed gate. I had not yet refused her anything. I had only declined to obey, which to a woman like that is the same as a delay, an obstacle to be gone around. So she went around me. "Fine," she said. "Bex, go and have a word with him. Give him 20 and tell him to take a walk for an hour." The assistant, who carried nothing, Bex, peeled off and started across the cobbles toward the bench, toward Mr. Alden, with the loose, confident stride of a man who'd cleared a dozen forecourts and lobbies and hotel bars of inconvenient people in his career, and expected the 13th to be no different. He had a folded note in his hand. 20, she'd said, and I understood that he was going to press money into an old man's palm and ask him, with a smile, to go and be poor somewhere out of shot. That was the moment my stillness stopped being enough. A guard on the King's Hour does not leave his post. That is not a guideline. It is the spine of the whole thing. The post is the point. The discipline is the message. If the man at the arch wanders off whenever he sees a wrong, then the arch means nothing and the house behind it means nothing. I knew that the way I knew my own name. And I knew just as surely that I was not going to stand at my arch like a painting, while a stranger paid an old man to vanish so a stranger's video would look tidier. So I did the only thing the discipline left me. I turned my head. Just my head, a slow, deliberate quarter turn, the kind we are trained never to make, the kind that makes a watching crowd go quiet because they know they have just seen the statue notice something. I turned my head, and I looked at Bex crossing the cobbles, and then I looked past him to the relief sergeant standing in the shadow of the colonnade where the off-duty section waits. Sergeant Call caught it. Of course he did. Catching things is the whole of a relief sergeant's morning. His eyes followed mine to the bench, to Bex, to the woman, to the cameras. And I watched him do the arithmetic I had just done: public forecourt, harmless old man, paid film crew, in order to clear a citizen off a public bench for the look of a broadcast, and come out at exactly the place I had come out. He stepped out of the shadow. "Hold up there, sir," he said to Bex, pleasant as a man asking the time. "Can I help you with something?" Bex stopped. He looked at the sergeant, then back at the woman, then at the bench, and you could see him recalculating, not whether he was in the right, that never crossed his mind, but how much friction this was going to be. "Just having a word with the gentleman," he said. "No trouble." "No trouble at all," Sergeant Call agreed, and did not move out of his way. Across the cobbles the woman's voice rose. "Is there a problem? I have a permit. I have a permit for this whole space until noon." And that, though none of us knew it yet, was the lie that would unmake her morning. Sergeant Call did not argue with her. That is a thing I have always admired in him. He does not argue with people who are wrong because arguing makes them feel like a worthy opponent. He simply turns their certainty into a question and lets them answer it themselves. "A permit for the whole space," he repeated, nodding slowly as if filing it away. "Issued by the forecourt office. You'll have it on you." "Of course I have it on me." She snapped her fingers at the tablet assistant, who scrolled and produced a document on the screen and held it up. Call did not lean in to read it. He had no need. He has read more forecourt permits than the office that issues them. "That's a filming permit for the gate and the section change," he said. "Public access maintained throughout." "That's the standard line, and it's on yours too, third paragraph. It means the public keep their forecourt while you keep your cameras. It does not mean you clear the benches." "It means," she said, biting each word, "that I have paid a considerable sum for the use of this location, and I am not going to have it ruined by a—" she gestured at Mr. Alden without looking at him, "the way you gesture at a thing, by a vagrant. Now I have been very patient. Either your soldier moves him, or your man moves him, or I will call the office and have someone move all of you. I will tell you what I felt, standing there, because behind the still face there is always a man, and the man is allowed to feel things so long as the face does not. I felt the particular cold that comes when someone powerful decides that a powerless person is in their way. I have felt it before. It does not announce itself with shouting. It announces itself with that flat, bored certainty, the certainty that the world is a set to be dressed, and people are either props or obstacles, and an old man on a bench is simply the wrong prop in the wrong place. She did not hate Mr. Alden. Hatred would at least have been a kind of attention. She had not granted him that much. To her he was a smudge on a lens, and you wipe a smudge. You do not ask the smudge how it feels about being wiped. Mr. Alden, for his part, had stopped feeding the pigeons. He had heard. Of course he had heard. She made no effort at all to be quiet, and the forecourt carries sound between the stone walls like the inside of a bell. He sat very still on his bench, the bag of crusts forgotten on his knee, his eyes down on the cobbles where the pigeons still pecked and bobbed, not understanding the change in the air. And I watched an old man do the thing that broke something open in my chest. I watched him begin, slowly, to gather himself to leave. He reached for his cane. He drew the bag closed with fingers that did not work as fast as they once had. He shifted forward to the edge of the bench, the way the old must in stages to stand. He was going to go. Not because anyone had the right to send him, but because all his life, I suspect, the easiest thing had been to be the one who left so that the loud people could have the room. "Sir," I heard Call say to him, gentle now, a different voice entirely from the one he'd used on Beck's. "Sir, you stay where you are. You're not in anybody's way." Mr. Alden looked up at the sergeant. "I don't want to be trouble," he said, and his voice was the quietest thing in that whole loud forecourt. "I can sit by the wall." "You can sit right there," Call said. "It's your bench as much as anyone's, more than some." And he turned and looked at the woman when he said the last part, and she understood it, and her face changed. "What I want you to understand is that nothing about this was loud yet. There were no raised hands, no cuffs, no shouting match. There was a woman with a permit she decided was a deed, an old man trying to make himself small, a sergeant declining to let him, and a guardsman at an arch who had turned his head once and could not, by every rule he served, turn anything else. The whole quarrel was being conducted in the register of the powerful and the patient, her impatience against our refusal to be hurried. But I have learned that this is exactly the register where the real wrongs live, not in the dramatic crimes, in the small, confident clearing away of the people who don't matter by the people who are sure they do. She made her call. She stepped aside, phone to her ear, and I could not hear the words, but I could read the shape of them clipped, rising, the free hand carving the air. She was calling the forecourt office, or someone above it, or someone she believed was above it. She was a person who, when an obstacle would not move, reached for a bigger lever, and she clearly believed she had a very big lever indeed. And here I will tell you the thing I did not yet know, the thing that turned the whole morning, though it would be the better part of an hour before any of us learned it. Mr. Alden was not a vagrant. The crew did not know it. The woman certainly did not know it. I did not know it, and I had stood 20 feet from him 5 mornings a week for 4 years. We had all of us looked at a worn coat and a paper bag of crusts and filled in the rest, because that is what a worn coat invites you to do. But the house knew. The house had always known. And the reason a guardsman's stillness and a sergeant's quiet, "You stay where you are," were about to matter so much more than either of us intended was that the man on the third bench had a right to that forecourt that no permit on earth could touch, a right written down, in a hand long dead, in a ledger kept in a room most of the house had forgotten existed. But that is ahead of the story. Stand with me a moment longer in the not knowing, because the not knowing is the point. The woman finished her call and came back wearing the look of someone who has summoned reinforcements and is now merely waiting for the inevitable. "Someone's coming," she said, to no one and to all of us. "We'll see whose forecourt this is." "We will," said Sergeant Call, and I have never heard a man agree with a threat so calmly. We did not have to wait long. A door opened in the colonnade, not the forecourt office's side door, but the tall paneled one that the staff of the house proper use, the one that leads back through the cloister toward the inner courts. And out of it came not a clerk, not a forecourt official with a clipboard, but a woman in the plain dark dress of the senior household, with a ring of keys at her waist that marked her rank to anyone who knew how to read it. I knew how to read it, so did Call. We both came an inch straighter without meaning to. Her name was Mrs. Hartley, and she was the keeper of the forecourt, which sounds like a small thing and is, in fact, one of the older and stranger offices of the house, the person whose charge is not the rooms or the treasures but the ground itself, the cobbles, the benches, the lamp, the right of the public to stand on stone that has been open to them for 300 years. She had not been summoned by the woman's phone call. She had been watching from a window, the way the household watches everything, and she had come down on her own account, which is a different and more dangerous thing for a person used to summoning people. She crossed the cobbles without hurry and stopped beside Mr. Alden's bench, And the first thing she did, before she looked at the woman, before she looked at the cameras, before she said a single word to any of us, was rest her hand on the old man's shoulder. "Good morning, Mr. Alden," she said. "Don't you get up." He knew her. You could see it in the way his shoulders came down from around his ears. "Morning, Mrs. Hartley," he said. "I was just—" and he made the smallest gesture, the universal gesture of a man explaining that he was about to remove himself. "You were just nothing of the sort," she said kindly, and the kindness had iron under it. "You'll finish your bread." Then she straightened and turned and looked for the first time at the woman in the coat the color of new money, and the temperature of the forecourt dropped a full degree. "You're the one filming," Mrs. Hartley said. It was not a question. "I have a permit." The woman had said it so many times by now that it had worn smooth in her mouth, like a coin she kept handing over expecting it to buy more than it did. "Until noon, the whole space. And I've asked repeatedly that this man be moved, and I've been refused by your soldier and your sergeant, and frankly I'd like to know who's actually in charge here, because I'm losing my light." "You're losing more than your light," Mrs. Hartley said, "but we'll come to that." She held out her hand, and the tablet assistant, who had spent the morning being right behind the wrong person, looked at his employer, hesitated, and then, to his credit, and to her fury, handed Mrs. Hartley the tablet with the permit on it. She read it the way Call had declined to, slowly, fully, her eyes moving down the screen, and when she reached the bottom she did not give it back. "This is a filming permit," she said, "for the gate and the section change, valid until noon, conditional on uninterrupted public access to the forecourt and its furnishings throughout. The furnishings, Miss Mara Vale, and I run it." "I know what you run, Miss Vale." She did not say it unkindly, which was somehow worse than if she had. "Half the house knows what you run. The furnishings, Miss Vale, are the benches, the lamp, and the rails. They are not yours to clear. The public access is not a courtesy we extend to you. It is the condition under which your camera is permitted to exist on this stone at all. You have spent your morning asking 3 servants of this house to break the single clause that makes your permit lawful. They were right to refuse you. Had any one of them obeyed you, I would be having a very different conversation with him, and it would end his career." I confess that last sentence steadied something in me. Not because I had not doubted, but because there is a particular relief in hearing the house say aloud, the thing your discipline had only allowed you to know in silence, that the order I had refused to obey was an order I had been right to refuse, and that the institution behind me was not going to leave me out on the cobbles to take the blame for holding the line it had drawn. But Miss Vale was not a woman who heard a closing door and stopped pushing. She had a lever, remember, and she had not yet pulled it. "You'll want to be careful," she said, and her voice changed register, out of impatience and into something cooler, something rehearsed, the voice of a person who has won a great many arguments by reminding the other side what she can do to them. "I have 9 million people who watch what I do. 9 million. I came here to show your house to the kind of audience your house can only dream of reaching, and I've been treated like a trespasser by a doorman, a sergeant, and a charity case on a bench. So before you lecture me about clauses, you might think about how this looks. One word from me, and 9 million people hear that the house threw an old man under the bus to protect its own rules, or that it's so cold and so backward it cares more about a vagrant's bench than the people who keep its lights on. I can make you the villain of this story by lunchtime. So, last time, move him." It was, I will grant her, a well-aimed threat. It is the modern lever, and it is a real one, the threat not of force but of narrative, the promise to take a true and decent thing and tell it crook to a vast and trusting crowd. I have seen it work. I have seen institutions fold before it, clearing the innocent away rather than risk an hour of being called cold by someone with a large enough microphone. And I waited, behind my still face, to see whether the house I served was that kind of house. Mrs. Hartley was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, she did not raise her voice. She lowered it so that the crew had to stop their fidgeting to hear, so that the boom operator tilted his pole down toward her without quite meaning to. "Miss Vale," she said, "you have made a threat to a keeper of this house on its own ground in front of its guard, and you've done it because you've decided the man on that bench is no one. So I'm going to do something the house very rarely does. I'm going to tell you who he is. Not because his being someone is what gives him the right to sit there. He has that right whether he's a duke or a beggar, and that is the whole point, and it is a point you have shown all morning you cannot grasp. I'm telling you because you have earned the embarrassment, and because the 9 million people you keep waving at us deserve a better story than the one you came here to make." She turned to Mr. Alden and her voice gentled again. "Will you let me, Edmund, just this once? They've earned it." The old man looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked, and this surprised me, at the guard under the arch, the one who had turned his head. Something passed over his face that I would only understand later when I knew the whole of it. A recognition, not of me, but of the post, the arch, the stillness. He knew exactly what it cost a man to hold that line because he had once known it from the inside. He nodded just barely. "Go on then," he said, "but I'd as soon they let me finish my bread." "You'll finish it," Mrs. Hartley said, and turned back to Miss Vale and the cameras and all of us. And she told it plainly, the way the best of the household tell things no flourish, just the facts laid down one after another like stones in a path. "This is Edmund Alden, 41 years a guardsman of this house. He stood the very arch your soldier is standing now, that arch, that exact post, for the better part of 2 decades, through 3 reigns and 1 war. He stood it the night the old wing burned and the embers came down on the cobbles like red snow, and he did not break his post until he was ordered off it, and then he carried 2 members of the household staff out of the smoke before he'd let the engines past. There's a mark on the lamp behind him, a scorch the masons never sanded out, and that's why. He has a commendation in the house book for it, signed in a hand you would recognize if I named it, which I will not. When he retired, the house granted him, as it grants every guardsman of 40 years and more, a thing most of the public never learn because the men who hold it never boast of it, the freedom of the forecourt. For life. The right to come and go on this stone, to sit on these benches, to be here as a guest of the house until his last day. It is written in the keeper's ledger. I keep that ledger. I checked it this morning before I came down, because I keep my facts in order, which is a habit you might consider. The forecourt had gone very quiet. The pigeons had drifted back to Mr. Alden's feet, and the only real sound for a moment was their soft, busy clucking and the faint wind in the flags. "So when you stood on this stone," Mrs. Hartley went on, "and called him a vagrant and a charity case, and a smudge you wanted wiped, you were standing in a place he held for 41 years so that people like you could stand in it safely. When you ordered our guard to move him, you ordered our guard to put a hand on a man who stood this post longer than that boy under the arch has been alive. And when you threatened to tell 9 million people that this house is cold, Miss Vale, I would dearly love for you to tell them. I would love for you to tell 9 million people that you came to a royal forecourt and tried to pay a 41-year guardsman to take a walk because his coat was too shabby for your camera. Tell them. I'll send you the man's record so you get the years right." I did not move. I want to be clear about that because it is the heart of everything I am trying to say. I did not move, and I did not change my face, and not one muscle of me betrayed what was happening behind it. But I will tell you what was happening behind it. I was standing more straight, more still, more truly at attention than I had stood in 11 years, because I had just learned that the man on the 3rd bench, the man I had filled in with a worn coat and a paper bag, the man I had been ordered to clear away, had held my arch, had carried 2 people out of the fire and gone back to his post, had stood where I stood and felt what I felt and been, for 41 years, the wall I was only learning to be. And nobody had ever told me. He had sat 20 feet from me, 5 mornings a week, for 4 years, feeding pigeons, and he had never once said, "I held that arch." Because that is the kind of man the post makes if it makes you right, the kind who does not need you to know. I understood then why he had looked at me when Mrs. Hartley asked her question. He had not been asking me for anything. He had been doing the only thing one guardsman of that arch can do for another across the gap of 40 years. He had been letting me see him, just for a moment, so that I would know I was not standing there alone. Miss Vale had stopped reaching for her lever. You could see it. The hand that had been carving the air had gone still at her side. She had built her whole morning on the certainty that the old man was no one, and the certainty had just gone out from under her like a floor. But she was not, even now, a woman who could simply say she was wrong. People like that almost never can. The most they can do is retreat into procedure, and that is what she did. "I wasn't told any of this," she said. "How was I supposed to know? Nobody told me he was that he used to." She gestured vaguely at the bench, the whole gesture transformed now, the contempt drained out of it, and nothing decent rushed in to take its place. If someone had simply explained. "You didn't ask," Mrs. Hartley said. "That's the whole of it, Miss Vale. You didn't ask who he was. You looked at an old coat and decided. You decided a man was disposable, and you ordered 3 servants of this house to dispose of him, and when they wouldn't, you reached for the one weapon you thought we'd fear. You never once thought the old man on the bench might be worth more than your morning's footage. And do you know what's truly remarkable? It wouldn't have mattered if he weren't. If he were exactly what you took him for, a poor old man with nowhere better to sit, he would still have had every right to that bench, and our guard would still have been right to refuse you, and I would still be standing here telling you no. The 41 years are not why you're wrong. They're just why you're embarrassed." That should have been the end of it. With most people it would have been a quiet retreat, the cameras packed away, a morning written off. But Miss Vale made one last decision, and it was the decision that brought the house down on her in full, because she made it loudly and on camera, and she made it against the wrong man at the wrong post. "You know what?" she said, snapping her fingers at the crew, her voice climbing back toward the register she'd started the morning in. "We're not doing this. We're not standing here being lectured. We'll film the gate, we'll film around him, and I want," she pointed at me, the finger leveled straight at the arch, "I want him out of the wide shot at least. He's been glaring at me for an hour. I'm not having a soldier with a face like that behind my product. Move him back. Move the soldier back." And there it was, the order, the real one, the one that finally drew the whole house up to its full height. Because moving an old man off a public bench is a wrong, but it is a quiet wrong, the kind a keeper handles with a ledger and a level voice. Ordering a guardsman off the King's Hour, telling the house to take its sentry off its own arch because his disciplined, unmoving face was inconvenient to a stranger's broadcast. That is not a quiet wrong. That is a thing the institution cannot let stand, and it does not let it stand quietly. Sergeant Call did not look at me. He looked at the colonnade, and he lifted 2 fingers, and the off-duty section came out of the shadow. There were 6 of them. They did not run. They never run. Running is for men who are late, and the house is never late to its own forecourt. They came out at the march, boots striking the cobbles in a single sound, and they did not form a line in front of Miss Vale. That would have been a threat, and the house does not threaten. They formed a line in front of Mr. Alden's bench. 6 guardsmen of the house, in perfect order, placed themselves between an old man on a bench and a woman with a camera, facing outward, eyes forward, as still and immovable as the stone behind them. They did not say a word. They did not have to. The message was written in their boots and their backs and the space they had chosen to stand in. This man, this bench, this ground is ours, and you will not pass. And then the door in the colonnade opened again, and this time it was not Mrs. Hartley. It was the Lord Steward of the house, the highest officer of the household, a man whose face Miss Vale clearly did know because she went pale when she saw him. He had been watching too. The whole house had been watching. That is the thing people like Miss Vale never understand about a place like this. They think the cameras are theirs. They are never theirs. The house has been watching its own forecourt for 300 years, and it does not need a lens to see. He did not cross to her. He crossed to the bench, to Mr. Alden, and he did a thing I will remember for the rest of my life. He stopped in front of the old man, and he came to attention, the Lord Steward of the house, in front of an old man in a mended coat, and he inclined his head. Not a bow, the house does not bow to its own. An acknowledgement. One servant of the house to another, across 41 years and a worn coat, saying without a word, "I know who you are, and I know what you held, and you are home here." Then he turned to Miss Vale, and he said, in a voice pitched perfectly for the cameras she had brought, "Your permit is revoked. Effective now. You will gather your equipment and leave the forecourt. You ordered a serving guardsman off his post on the ground that his discipline displeased you, and you attempted to have a freeman of this forecourt removed for the convenience of a broadcast. You will not film this house today, or, I think, again. And you are quite right that 9 million people should hear about this morning. I will see to it that they hear it correctly." He let that sit. Then more quietly, but not so quietly the boom couldn't catch it. "We do not move our old men for your light, Miss Vale. We stand in front of them. That is what the uniform is for." I have replayed that line 100 times. We stand in front of them. That is what the uniform is for. I had spent 11 years thinking the uniform was for holding still. He gave me, in 9 words, the better half of it, that the stillness is only worth anything because of who it stands in front of. Miss Vale left. There is no dramatic way to describe it because there was nothing dramatic about it. The drama had already happened and she had lost it. Her crew packed their tripods in a tense, embarrassed silence, the boom man avoiding everyone's eyes, the tablet assistant moving with the careful quiet of someone who has decided to find a new employer by the afternoon. She did not apologize to Mr. Alden. She did not look at him. She walked out through the gate she'd had a permit to film and never once filmed, and the cobbles she'd called her stayed exactly where they'd always been. The Lord Steward was as good as his word, and better. The house did not bury the morning, it told it. By that evening a short, plain account had gone out under the house's own name. No anger in it, no naming of Miss Vale beyond a visitor, just the facts. That a guest had asked the house to remove an elderly man from a public bench so that a film would look tidier. That the man was a 41-year guardsman of the house holding the freedom of the forecourt. That the house's guards had declined the order, and the house stood behind them, and the old man had stayed. It ended with a single line that I am told a great many more than 9 million people eventually read. The forecourt is open to all, and always has been. Some of those who sit there have given it more than we can ever repay. We do not ask them to move. It went, as they say, everywhere. But it did not go everywhere as the story of a woman shamed. The house had been too disciplined for that. There was barely a sentence about her in it. It went everywhere as the story of the old man on the bench, and the guards who stood in front of him, and a forecourt that had kept its doors open for 300 years, and did not intend to close them for anyone's camera. People came in the days after, not to gawk mostly, but to sit, to be on the open stone. An old man feeding pigeons had reminded a great many people what a public place is for. As for me, I stood my arch. I did not move that morning, not for the order, not for the threat, not even when the section marched out, and the Lord Steward came to attention before the bench, and something in my chest wanted very much to break ranks and do the same. I held the king's hour, because that was my post, and the post was the point, and the best thing I could give Edmund Alden was to stand his old arch the way he had stood it, without needing anyone to clap. But when my relief came at noon and I stepped down, and was a man again instead of a wall, I did not go straight in. I walked across the cobbles to the third bench from the west wall, the one nearest the scorched lamp I would never again walk past without seeing differently. He was still there. He had, in the end, finished his bread. I came to attention in front of him, out of uniform now, just a tired man who'd stood a long watch, but I came to attention anyway, because some things you do with the body when the words won't come. And I held it. He looked up at me with that folded letter face, and something moved at the corner of his mouth that, on a less disciplined man, would have been a smile. "At ease, son," he said. "I held it long enough to know the trick isn't never moving." He nodded toward the arch, toward the empty space where the woman and her cameras had been, toward the 6 who'd marched out and the steward who'd come down, and the whole quiet weight of the house that had risen up that morning to stand in front of one old man on a bench. "The trick is knowing what you won't move for." Then he reached into the paper bag, found one last crust he'd been saving, and laid it down in a slow arc near my boots. The boldest pigeon came at once. The timid ones ate at the edges. I stood there with him until the last of it was gone.